Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. In one of the most recent episodes of the Skeleton Crew, spoiler alert, when we arrive on the spa world of Lanupa, I started geeking out at one of the smaller bits of information given to us. At this luxurious vacationing spot for criminal mobsters, industrial barons, and the political elite, there's one more group that might be richer and more powerful than all of the other groups.
Why so much security?
The Banking Clan is here for an economic summit and to enjoy the baths. So, we are on high alert for spies and imposters.
The Banking Clan. You know, the Mune-led Intergalactic Banking Clan, or at least that's what it was called before all that turmoil and chaos threw the galaxy into two massive wars. That Intergalactic Banking Clan. Somehow, it has returned. Now, I'm not that surprised, honestly, that they are around, although in the back of my head, in my own personal canon, I for some reason thought they had been destroyed. They seemed like a great scapegoat for the Separatist crisis, which of course were orchestrated by the Sith so that Palpatine could take over complete control of the galaxy. Sandhill, the chairman of the Intergalactic Banking Clan, had been slaughtered alongside the rest of the Separatist Council by Darth Vader on Mustafar. And months earlier, Palpatine already nationalized the banking clans anyway, and so yeah, I am, I guess, a little bit surprised to see them here in the post-Empire period. You see, the Intergalactic Banking Clan is kind of the perfect party to blame for all of the craziness that happened leading up to the Clone Wars and then during the Imperial period. The sheer amount of criminal behavior and just terrible investments this entity made should have destroyed all trust in this banking system. But I guess just like in real life, the banking class is a necessary evil, and so even when they royally screw up and do things that should erode our trust in that system, we can't necessarily get rid of them, because we need banks to make society function. Now, the IGBC wasn't always like this. For the longest time, it was one of the most trusted institutions in the galaxy until the Sith got their hooks and claws into the organization. And this goes all the way back to Darth Sidious's own master, Darth Plagueis, one of the most brilliant Sith Lords of the Rule of Two era. While Darth Bane destroyed the Sith, allowing them to break old nasty habits and, be rebirthed into a new organization, it was Darth Plagueis who truly reformed the Order and helped shape a winning strategy that would not only fool the Jedi, but the entire galaxy. After a lot of soul-searching, the Rule of Two Sith realized that they had been going about their struggle against the Jedi completely wrong. Up until this point, the Sith would openly challenge the Republic and their Jedi allies in conventional wars, and even if they initially did well in these conflicts, they would ultimately get destroyed and collapse. And that's because the Sith were too chaotic in nature as an organization, and the individuals who led the Sith were usually focused on short-term gains and consumed with fighting for power at all costs. They would also completely underestimate the much more peaceful Republic and their much more productive economy. You see, using Sith mentality at the time, the Republic always looked weak. They usually had a pretty decentralized security apparatus, which meant a weak federal military and a concentration of resources at the local and sector level when it came to defense. The demilitarization after the Rusan Reformation and the demilitarization after the New Republic was quite common. Once the war was finished, the Republic almost always demilitarized. Generally speaking, market economies like the Republic with a representative democracy usually put more focus on economic development and growth rather than building massive peacetime military forces, which were not only politically unpopular but also a huge strain on your overall economic growth. The Sith operated in more of a totalitarian nature, hovering between Hermit Kingdom to Galactic Empire, depending on the state of the galaxy. The Sith generally favored more central control over almost every aspect of their citizens' lives, whether it's military affairs or the distribution of resources for their economy. And so on paper, the Sith always had a much larger and more powerful military force, even though the Sith faction and a much smaller population and less economic potential. They also had really pointy ships, fearsome-looking warriors, really cool-looking starships, super weapons that could crack open entire worlds, stuff like that. And so if you didn't actually look at the larger statistics and you just looked at the Sith military, it was terrifying, formidable, powerful, and it could deliver really swift and deadly blows through the Republic, but in the long run, the Sith always ran out of steam. It's kind of like North Korea versus South Korea. North Korea regularly spends 25% of their GDP on the military, while South Korea spends just under 3%. But North Korea's GDP is about 60 times smaller than South Korea's. And even though they have, all these huge military parades, nuclear weapons tests and all these other things, in a longer war, they just don't have the stamina to keep up with the South's industrial capacity and might. That's what the Sith were like. They would always start the war with a bang, cause massive destruction to the peripherals of the Republic. Meanwhile, the Republic was usually very slow to respond, as the political system had to first awaken to the reality of what was going on. But eventually, the proper political and economic policies were passed, and the Republic's industrial center would retool for war footing. And then at that point, it was basically game over for the Sith, as they were overwhelmed by Hammerhead-class cruisers. It didn't matter how stupid the Republic ships looked, how soft their soldiers were, their numbers were just too large for the Sith to handle. And so the Rule of Two Sith kind of realized this problem, but it wasn't really until Darth Plagueis came around that they realized what the solution was. Legends say that Darth Plagueis was created by his own master Tenebris, who paid a Force-sensitive Muun to have a child with a mid-ranking executive within the Intergalactic Banking Clan, known as Kar Damask. Ego Damask, as Plagueis was known in Legends, would slowly work his way up the ranks in the IGBC. Meanwhile, he would use his Force powers and the Rule of Two Sith's resources to carefully plant allies in key positions within the banking system, and also he created economic opportunities for the banking clans through political lobbying and just causing chaos, like igniting sectarian violence in certain areas or assassinating certain corporate actors. Eventually, Ego Damask would create a lobbying group/fund known as Damask Holdings, and it was through Damask Holdings that the Sith would carry out some of their most audacious plans to destabilize the galaxy, and also gather wealth inside of the IGBC. So what makes the IGBC so central to the Sith's plan? Well, this was a collection of some of the most powerful banking entities in galactic history. Many of these individual banks dated back to the creation of the Galactic Republic. And in a free market economy, the banking system is extremely important and powerful. They're the ones who allocate capital to, various actors so that they can grow and become more powerful in their own right. If you control the banks, you can essentially control where society invests and even the political process. What made the IGBC so special compared to other banking networks was it was run by the Muun, a species that was really well known for their lack of emotions, or at least control of their emotions, and intelligence. They were essentially the perfect bankers. The Muun's entire society revolved around financing and banking, and so they had a culture that put a huge emphasis on the importance of fairness and justice, and they viewed contracts and banking regulations as almost sacred. The IGBC quickly became one of the most trusted banking organizations in the galaxy. The cultural aspect and the stereotypes surrounding the Muun's definitely helped their ascension, but they were also really hardworking and competent at what they did. The consolidation of power by large megacorporations like the IGBC was a predominant feature in the late Republic era. The central government had grown progressively weaker as more and more business interests started appearing in the legislature. The IGBC even had its own direct representation in the Senate. To illustrate just how powerful this was, most planets in the galaxy were represented at the sector level, which usually included roughly 50 or so other individual planets and moons. Now, the IGBC was mostly invested in very profitable and beneficial projects. For instance, they provided funding for the transformation of Iradu into an outer rim trading and mining hub for Lawmite. But at the same time, the Sith were secretly using the IGBC to fund some of their more chaotic programs, like the development of the Kaminoan clone army, and also the construction of droid factories on Geonosis for Bactoid automata, which would produce the Separatist droid army. We talk about all these stereotypes with the Muun's, and this not only led to a lot of resources being invested in their banks, it also led to a lack of regulation from the federal government. I mean, the Muun's were supposed to be great at assessing risks when they handed out these loans, but, investment into a large standing army is never really a good idea. It's risky to invest in military expenditure. The creation of a military force doesn't create value, like the creation of some apartment blocks, for instance. Military forces usually become huge liabilities as they cost a lot of money to maintain and field. And then if these military forces are actively engaged in a war, there's usually the larger threat of the government or entity borrowing money from suffering economic losses because of the destructive nature of war. Despite what a lot of conspiracy theories will tell you, usually people in the banking sector hate instability, and war is as unstable as things can get usually. And so by funding the creation of the Kaminoan clone army, the Mun were taking on a huge, very risky loan. That could not only potentially hurt the shareholder in the larger network of banks, but because the IGBC was the largest banking system in the galaxy, it could potentially cause a recession if it takes on too many of these really terrible and risky loans. So yeah, the Kaminoan clone army loan was pretty crazy, but financing the creation of this separatist military, now that was completely unhinged. I mean, first, it was clearly against the interests of the IGBC to support a separatist movement, because giving them weapons would surely create a conflict that would destabilize the Republic. And the IGBC had the majority of its investment in the Republic, in all sorts of business ventures, local governments, outer rim development projects. So creating a war threatened almost everything. You could almost argue that the IGBC had more interest in preventing the war than any other institution in the galaxy, because, again, they were making a lot of money from all of these loans. And if you think about it, by funding both the clone army and the separatist army and having these two entities fight each other, the IGBC was essentially just destroying its own wealth by giving money to both parties in a war. It just doesn't make any sense. What makes this all even more messed up is that without IGBC funding, it's very unlikely that the separatist movement could have even created such a large navy and army in the first place. The business interests that backed the Confederacy of Independent Systems had a lot of factories and resources ready for this type of ramping up of production, but they didn't have the cash to actually operate these factories, and that is where the IGBC came in. The IGBC had somehow been convinced by Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious that starting this kind of conflict could actually be good for the banks, especially in the short term. I guess greed got the best of the IGBC, and in their defense, in those last years of the Republic, all that unrest and chaos had actually created more lending opportunities. And so the year the Clone Wars started, the IGBC had posted like 18 consecutive quarters where they made gains. And their growth would only explode as worlds would secede from the Republic. The IGBC was there to provide all of these newly freed planets with financial assistance, now that they were no longer dependent on the Republic system. But by the end of the conflict, as the Confederacy was besieged in the Outer Rim, those interest payments suddenly stopped coming. It became very clear that a large amount of the loans that the IGBC had given to the CIS were probably never going to get paid back. When it became obvious that the IGBC was about to go bankrupt, the Sith tried to force newly appointed chair of the organization, Russ Clovis, into levying massive interest rates on new loans to the Republic for military purchases, which of course led to an actual physical battle for the planet of Scipio, where the IGBC was headquartered. After this fiasco, Chancellor Palpatine assumed control of the banking system. Palpatine was trying to cover up this potential bankruptcy, which could cause a massive recession. So by nationalizing the banking system, he was trying to shore up trust in the banking system. Palpatine also always wanted a federal banking system underneath his control so that he could control monetary policies and potentially print more credits in order to create another massive military force. What's surprising is that only the top leadership of the IGBC was purged and, assassinated. Even Emperor Palpatine recognized the skills and knowledge of the Mun bankers and kept them in their position managing the Empire's banking system and finances. I thought for sure that Palpatine would appoint his own loyalists to, head the IGBC, but not even the Sith were stupid enough to mess with the banking system. Although the Empire did appoint some administrators and supervisors to make sure the IGBC was doing things in the proper way. Ultimately, I'm not surprised at all that we see the Muns lounging peacefully in those pools on Lanopu. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're the Republic, the New Republic, the Empire, you're going to be depending on a lot of institutions and bureaucrats to run your galactic economy. And the banking system is not something you can just get rid of. No matter how crazy you are, you're always going to need lenders to be able to facilitate the transfer of capital to various projects. And so this is why these Muns are sipping on some Mai Tais in some hot springs, even though they really helped orchestrate two of the largest wars and disasters in galactic history. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.